This is the very first business clinic that I've hosted, and I'm very grateful to Lisa for joining me for this and being my first victim here for this series. My intention for this series is to help authors tackle some of the thornier business challenges, the things that you really can't instruct people on in a single post, and sometimes not even an entire book. And author websites fall under that, especially when you're relaunching or redesigning, which can actually be harder than starting from scratch. Especially when you get a little bit into your career, there are lots of difficulties that come into play, like how much to spend, how much of the work to do yourself, how much certain things are really a problem versus you should just let it go. And you're going to hear lots of those sorts of situations today. So Lisa is both a friend and a colleague who I've come to know over the last several years. She teaches classes with me, and in fact, she's teaching a class with me next week. She is a published writer. She's working on her memoir, which I believe is out on submission. And she's published a range of personal essays in publications. Her work's been featured on NPR, Hippocampus, and other magical places, and more to come. So she works as a writer, an editor, a coach. She speaks at conferences, so her website has to fulfill a variety of functions. And before we get into the nuts and bolts of this, I would love for Lisa to just talk a little bit about her site, the history of it, how it started, and where it's at now.
Yes, and first, thank you, Jane, for letting me be your guinea pig. I'm very grateful, and I've loved seeing all the different names that I recognize and all of the new people. So let's talk about my website, which I both love and hate at times. So I started this website back in 2014, knowing absolutely nothing. And I had a free WordPress theme that I used. And I'll be honest, it was terrible. Like, it was really terrible. I did not know what I was doing, and it functioned and people could show up and, contact me, but the design was really poor. And so I worked with someone in 2017. This was a one-off, right? So I hired someone who was largely a designer to come in and redesign my site using Divi. So this is a customized Divi site. And she went into the CSS, which is kind of the code behind the scenes, to customize some things. And I don't know anything about CSS. So just that alone created a large amount of angst inside me about breaking my site. So that was something that's kind of been there looming in the background. And that fear and angst, and I will say rage at times, has been exacerbated by my host. So I started off with Bluehost back in 2014. And at the time, it was a highly rated hosting service. So I was with them. I've stayed with them largely because I wasn't sure exactly how to get off that and not break my website. In the beginning, it worked really well. However, over time, the customer service has gotten poorer. I've had issues with the SSL certificate, which is needed in order for your website to work. My website got shut down a couple of times because of issues on Bluehost side. I've had issues with the PHP. There's been an issue with this one plugin where the backup doesn't work right, and I have to go in and manually delete things through using the FTP. So there's a lot of work that has to go into managing this website. So it's very labor intensive. And I think that's one of the things that happened is that the person who designed my website is a designer. So she was really good at saying, like, here's how your website can look really good on the outside, at least at that time. But in terms of understanding Divi, that was not necessarily her skill set. And so I think that has created some limitations. Because of, again, of that CSS issue, I find that my Divi site is rather cumbersome. I have to do a lot of things by hand. I noticed that also there's a lot of plugins, so I have to update them. I've told you about that FTP issue. And on top of that, I feel like the site definitely needs a refresh. And I will be the first to say there are no pictures of me on it. And that is because I was going to get pictures, in early 2020, and then the pandemic hit. And I had decided that I was going to grow my hair out to my natural color, which you now see. And there's this long period of time when you're growing out your hair that's super awkward, and trying to get pictures would not have been helpful. So I am now at that stage where I can redesign and relaunch my website and get those pictures, which will make this more personalized.
Excellent. So that's a really nice rundown. I think it also shows that problems with sites tend to arise from designers and site builders who you've hired to help you and have the best intentions, but then create things that present stumbling blocks later. This is going to come up as we move through the session, the dangers of that. Okay. So Lisa, before we did this session, Lisa provided me with a written list of all of her frustrations and disappointments with the site, and I categorized them into these 3 buckets. So what you just heard from Lisa falls into tech issues, content marketing and design issues, and then also administrative issues. So we're going to tackle these issues in very specific groups. And the first issue I want to talk about is hosting related. So you heard Lisa talk about the hosting experience not being the greatest, Bluehost. She wants a better backup system. She wants to increase her website speed. And she's also thinking about someone on the tech side, a site manager, should major problems occur. So these generally fall or are controlled by your host. Now, for those who don't know what a host is, that's essentially the company that keeps your website up and running. I mean, they're responsible for whether your site is up or down. If you're using something like WordPress.com, which is free, or Blogspot.com, which is free, or at least free on the basic level for WordPress.com, that company is acting as your host. Lisa has what's known as a self-hosted site, which means she pays a host to keep it up and running. So it is a bit more of a complex setup. But it means that your choice of host actually affects a lot of things. And some writers don't realize this. It's like if you have a bad host, it's like being on a rowboat that you have to manually row across the lake. And it's really hard to get anywhere. It's really hard to get help. Whereas having a great host is like having a speedboat. So the basic function here, what a host does at its core, is to keep you afloat, to keep you up and running, but they operate in very different ways, and they have structural differences and service differences. So it affects your site speed, whether it's easy to back up your site staging, like if you're going to make changes to your site, like if you're going to do a redesign, if you're going to choose a new template, you want to have a host that allows you to stage the new version while the old one stays up. And then you basically click a button. And once you're done with the new site, it becomes your live site. So really good hosts have that staging functionality, which makes the redesign process a lot easier. A good host also has good site security. They can provide you with email addresses and email hosting. That's a different issue, but something that can be involved in your decision making. And most importantly, they offer support and service when you have technical issues. Now, a really basic host is going to cost you like $5 to $20 per month. Does that sound, Lisa, like about what you were paying Bluehost, or did it go up even from there?
It definitely was more than that. I would say probably with the kind of plan I had, it was closer to like $40 to $45 a month.
Gosh, okay. So that's disappointing to hear that you were paying that much for such a poor experience. So I think it's clear that we don't recommend Bluehost as a hosting company. It does beg the question of what host should you use instead. I use SiteGround, and I use them because of the recommendation of someone I trust. And Lisa, in fact, you've just moved to SiteGround because you're in the very early stages of this relaunch. And do you want to talk about what's happened so far?
Holy cow. So one of the issues that I had prior to this move was the load speed of my pages. So there would be a delay of between 5 to 7 seconds anytime anyone went to another page, and especially if they were launching my homepage. Now it's like not even a second. And the only thing that has happened is the migration to SiteGround. That's it. We haven't done anything else, and it's made a huge difference.
Yes. So if you're on a poor host, just switching hosts can resolve some of the issues you might be having with your site, especially the ones you see listed here. For those who don't have much tech experience, you may want to be looking at something called managed hosting. It's more expensive, but it includes better customer service, tech support. And if you're looking at switching hosts, you may want to look at the companies that will migrate you for free. So hosts generally have a huge financial incentive to migrate you for free, because it's not, you don't change hosts like you change underwear. It's typically painful. You don't want to do it a lot. So usually they will help you make that change, knowing how painful it is at no cost to you. That doesn't mean it's problem free, but it does take some of the weight off of your shoulders if you can find a host who will do that for you. I see that Diana is asking in the Q&A, how do I recommend switching from Bluehost to SiteGround? If you also have an external DNS with Cloudflare, would you recommend having SiteGround customer service move it, or could a web developer move it? Or how do this gets into some really technical considerations, which unfortunately I can't answer, but definitely, Diana, you're not the first person who's wanted to do that. And I have to imagine that SiteGround support is your first line of attack there, and asking what advice do they have for making that switch. I know that SiteGround itself has, Cloudflare services packaged with some of their hosting. So it's probably not going to be that big of a problem to make that transition, but it may involve, usually every migration like that, when you're switching hosts, involves some amount of downtime. So just be prepared for that. Okay, so Jane asks a clarifying question about how do you change hosts, and she wants to keep her domain name. Just to make sure everyone that we're all on the same page, when we talk about hosts, we're just talking about, who keeps the lights on. It's like a utility company. It doesn't change your address or your domain name. It only changes who's providing you with the utility of keeping your site up. So you can keep the same domain name while you switch who's providing you the service. The technical parts of keeping the domain name, usually it's not a big deal, but that gets more into the technical weeds than we have time for, unfortunately. We have a question about what is Cloudflare. Just briefly, Cloudflare is something that speeds up your site. It's a caching service. A lot of hosts offer it because a faster site usually means a better site, meaning that it ranks better in search and keeps people on the site longer. Okay. Now, so moving on, the host thing is a fairly straightforward issue. Even though it's a technical issue that's intimidating, once you've changed hosts, you're done usually until another technical problem arises. The really thorny issue, I think, especially in Lisa's case and in many other cases, is when your theme or your site design is just not really doing it for you anymore. Some people's themes or their site design, it's outdated, or it's clunky, or they're just pieces of it that are really aggravating, as Lisa described. Now, for a term, I need to pause and talk about terminology here. When I talk about theme, I'm really talking about WordPress themes. A lot of author websites are based on WordPress, and WordPress, when you apply a site design, you're selecting a theme. There are other words for that on other site platforms like Squarespace, Blogspot, all these other Wix, Weebly. They all have certain designs or skins or things that you apply that essentially give your site its look and feel. With WordPress in particular, where the theme issue gets really tortured is that themes also have functionality associated with them. Sometimes they come with plugins. Sometimes they come with special widgets. Sometimes they come with the ability to actually build the pages. So they can get really complex. And as you increase the complexity, it means your site is more likely to break when you switch themes. So Lisa's theme is Divi. And Divi is a really popular WordPress theme that is what's known as a page building theme. Now, I need to pause and explain what a page building theme is. This is really quite important. In the old days of WordPress, and we're not talking about that long ago, like 2 years ago, like since WordPress started until roughly 2019, your classic WordPress theme and template was like a bucket of content with some stuff around it. So everything that you're looking at here, like this screen capture here, which is an old version of my site, you've got a blog post, this yellow part, which doesn't change. It's just static, right? You can't change the layout of that. And then you've got the theme-driven elements around it. So that would be the header and the menu, the sidebar. Those are more fluid and you can change those very easily. You can still approach your website design in this classic manner with WordPress, but it's kind of an outdated way to handle it, to have every page look like this. Today, WordPress has something called the Gutenberg editor. So the Gutenberg editor allows you to have very flexible and dynamic page designs that actually an average person can produce. Most importantly, it doesn't require having a page builder WordPress theme. So a page building WordPress theme would be something like Divi, which Lisa now uses. I used to use a page building theme. It was called Site Origin. There are others out there, Elementor, Beaver Builder. They used to be really popular. They're still quite popular because they got you away from that really boring page design and allowed you to build columns, and then they had lots of cool features. So I don't know if this is why you ended up choosing it, Lisa, or maybe your designer chose Divi for you. I know it's very popular with authors, and this is the ability to do these dynamic page designs was really a driving reason for people to adopt those themes. Did you want to add anything here about that?
That is exactly why I chose Divi, was because it would give me greater functionality and more flexibility in how I design the pages.
Yeah. So if you take nothing else away from this session, please understand that WordPress's new way of building pages, which is known as Gutenberg, really lessens, if not eliminates, the need for these page building themes and page building systems. And the reason I'm really hitting on this point hard is because there is an astronomical cost for moving from one page building theme to a different one or to some other theme, or just going back to Gutenberg. Your site breaks. The minute you take that theme off your site, you don't have a site anymore because that system is no longer being used. So it increases the cost to move off of it. It increases the workload and the headache of switching themes. So this is why I really warn against using a page building theme currently. Choosing it new from scratch, I don't think I would do it. And if you're on one today, you are probably looking at the chance of moving off it in the near future. So that's the bad news. That's the really bad news for Lisa in this redesign and relaunch. It's something that I had to deal with last year, and it took me a full 6 months to transition it behind the scenes myself. Because I was so invested in my page builder and I have so many pages on my website. Yes, I could have farmed it out, but I'm a control freak and I also know how to do website design. So I just wanted to handle it myself, but it was time intensive. Okay. So what theme should you choose? Well, it's really important to research the theme and its history and its reviews and its support. before you commit fully, especially if you're paying a lot of money for a website relaunch. Like if you're hiring someone to do this for you, you need to feel pretty confident about the theme you're choosing because you don't want to be switching it every year or two. It's a burden. So you want to look at when the theme was last updated. Hopefully it's been within the last few months. Most themes are updated on a monthly basis, if not more frequently, because they have to keep up with technological changes. You want to look at whether the theme is Gutenberg ready or acknowledges the fact it's made to work well with the Gutenberg editor. Some themes were designed from an earlier era and they just don't necessarily work that well with the Gutenberg system. Take a look at how many sites use it. The more, the better. This is not a case of you want to choose the least well-known theme because the fewer people who use it, the fewer chances you have to have your problem solved because someone else has already experienced it and found the solution. Take a look at the reviews, which you can find at the WordPress site, and look for that support forum and see how well supported it is. You can find answers to all of these questions at wordpress.org/themes. And no, I don't. This is what it looks like when you end up on that page, wordpress.org/themes. If it's not already selected, choose popular because you want to go with a popular theme that's been troubleshooted within an inch of its life. And then don't stray too far from the top popular themes. You might want to rule out some of the themes that are called by the year, like 2021, 2020, 2019, 2018, etc., because they tend to be a little bit basic. But other than that, I would say look to these first before you decide you need something different. Now, Lisa, have you chosen a theme yet, or are you still debating?
I wanted to go through this process first before I made a decision.
Okay, totally understandable. So the theme that everyone asks me what themes I recommend, aside from just going straight to the popular ones, I really like GeneratePress. Now, I am not an affiliate. I have no stake in this company. I just really like their system. It's very lightweight and it's fast, which we're going to emphasize again and again. Having a fast site is pretty important for your overall success, especially for search engine results, SEO reasons, and also just to make sure people don't get frustrated and leave. So the nice thing about GeneratePress, if you're not sure if you like it or want to use it, is that there is a free version. So you can kick the tires a little bit. And then if you really, really like it and want the full suite of customizations, you can upgrade to the premium, and that costs $59 a year or $249 for a lifetime license. Now, I use this across all of my sites but one. So I use it at my courses website, at my main website, and at the Hot Sheet newsletter website. Because it's so customizable, it looks very different in every iteration. So it's just a nice blank slate to start with, although they do have a site library where you can apply some different skins, if you will, if you need a little boost to get started, especially if you're not working with a designer. Now that I've come to the designer piece, this is also pretty important, and the reason I often recommend GeneratePress. Very few people have the money to hire someone to do a bespoke, custom-made WordPress template, whether they're starting with something like GeneratePress or something else. So Lisa described earlier how she had a designer set some CSS styles and do some other things that then became really hard for Lisa to navigate around without fear of breaking her site. What I like about GeneratePress is that it gives you, especially on the premium level, at your fingertips, the ability to customize fonts and colors and other things that lend branding to your site without you having to hire a designer or get into the coding of the site in order to make those changes take effect. So it's a very non-techie, non-designer friendly way of achieving a custom look. Now, there is a learning curve with every theme. I'm not going to say you're going to understand it from day one, but the functionality is there. And as you get more comfortable with it, I think it really benefits people who aren't going to be hiring a designer and spending thousands and thousands of dollars for that bespoke design. Okay, so now that I've said all that, Lisa, do you have any questions about themes? I'll also browse the Q&A here.
I don't think I have any. I don't have any questions, but I do want to say that taking time to really think about the theme and what works with other people is really, really important, because I had done some of that work, but had I known what I know now about the changes to the CSS code and how inflexible it was going to be for me, given my level of tech ability, I would have made a different choice, or I would have liked to have known that other choices were out there. I'm not sure that there were in 2017, because even though that's not that long ago, I mean, everything has changed so much.
Yes. So just to answer some of the questions that are coming up related to this. Hold on just a second. So E.M. Clark is asking if I suggest premium themes over free, and not at first. So especially if you're early in your site building or site design experience, I think it's less burdensome and easier to tackle the challenge if you start with the free theme. Like, so with GeneratePress as an example, and many popular themes have a free version that you can do so much with without having the premium version of it. So start with the free and see how far you can get. And then when you run up against a wall, you can think about, okay, will the premium allow me to take that next step? Every time you get into paying for themes, you're increasing the complexity and your commitment. So you just have to be certain that you really want that added complexity and it's deserved. Yolanda says she's happy with her Divi WordPress site, and I know many authors are. I don't want to drag on Divi, and I'm sure that there's some people who are very comfortable with it and can work with whatever drawbacks it might have. But if I say you have to switch soon, Yolanda wonders how soon and what can you do to prepare, even if you're happy with your site. So by soon, I'm thinking like years, not a decade, but like I would be thinking about probably in the next 3 to 5 years, I should probably leave this system, especially given the progress that the Gutenberg editor, which is the native editor in WordPress, given the advances that have been made there. To prepare, I would suggest, this is going to depend a lot on how your site has been built. But what I did over a long period of time is I transitioned all of my pages out of my page builder system, and I started building them natively in WordPress. So if you're a WordPress user, that will make total sense, I hope. When you use a page builder system, basically all you see are the elements of that page builder system governing how the page looks. When you're doing it natively in WordPress, using the native WordPress blocks, what you see is what you get. So there is no middleman, there's no layering on top of that. So you will want to begin that process of making your pages native again to WordPress in order to ease the transition later on. Okay, so I wanted to talk a little bit about themes and design as far as when you're thinking about switching. A lot of people actually go to the more complicated options, thinking it's going to be a better site, like the bells and the whistles and the pretty stuff. Usually it doesn't add, it often detracts. So now I have to admit a bias here that I do like minimalism. That said, you're going to find lots of different authors who have rich and interesting websites using a pretty light touch. So James Clear is a best-selling author. I think his book Atomic Habits has sold more copies than any other book in the last 3 years, nonfiction wise. Notice this is just the top, like above the fold before you scroll. This is what his homepage looks like. So simple and direct, you know, it's just, and he's only focused on selling this one book. So he has a little bit easier. He is like singular minded here. He's just going to show you his book. And if you scroll a little bit further, it's his email newsletter sign up. It's just white. It's just a white site with navigation, but it's very powerful. Roxanne Gay, notice we also have another white site with navigation focused on the latest book that she has out. There's not much else to the site, like other than clicking through the navigation. But just when I look at these sites, it's kind of refreshing. There's not, it's not an assault on the senses. I can easily see what the core focus is for this person. And I can easily find what I'm looking for. Maybe I want to see her other publications or where she's going to be appearing, or I want to see a list of her books. I can easily find those things. This is Allison Williams' website, and I'm showing this because she often criticizes her own website and says it's not that great. But it has a strength, which is a singular focus. She's basically just telling you, look, here's the work I do. And if you want to work with me, click here. Now there is a navigation menu under that little hamburger menu on the upper left-hand corner, and that will take you to things like events, things she's published, etc. But again, look at how focused the message is. Tara McMullen is an online marketer, entrepreneur. She's in the marketing field, like a Seth Godin sort of type. For someone who's focused on marketing, notice again how bare bones this site is. It's very effective in speaking directly to visitors. And when she does have something really important she wants people to see, if she has a really important thing she has to sell, you will likely see it on a pop-up, or you will see it called out somewhere in the navigation to the left. Ashley C. Ford has her first memoir out. It came out earlier this year. This is like the entirety of her homepage. 3 links: bio, writing, appearances. You'll notice, I have to say, that usually the more A-list or successful the author, the more minimalist their website becomes. So there's definitely some of that at work here in some of these website designs, but they're also just really effective designs. A word of caution here, and this is going to come up later. If you choose to use an image like this huge, big image right here on your homepage, there are a couple rules if you do this. One is it needs to be high quality. And the other is you need to be really careful with what you layer on top of it. So as soon as you start layering text on images, the complication factor skyrockets. Will it be readable? What's the contrast like? How will it look on mobile? So you have all of these factors that play into whether you're going to be able to pull it off. So just be careful when you do this. You have to, when you use a big image, you automatically have to keep things pretty light on the text. Another minimalist site of an editor. If you scroll down the page, what I love about this site is that you see all of his book covers, all of the books he's worked on, just the covers cascading down. It makes a really powerful statement. And here's another example, the last example of a big image. Notice that this is a marketing mentor, Elise Benin. That's, you don't actually see her name on the site, which I think is a mistake. But she's known by her brand, Marketing Mentor. Again, notice how it's really focused, one message, one button. And I would have to guess that this photo was taken expressly for the purpose of appearing in this spot on her homepage. So I just want to talk briefly before we get into a critique of Lisa's site of what it's going to cost to hire out work if you are feeling overwhelmed about homepage design, choosing a theme, how to balance the considerations I've been talking about. And Lisa, full disclosure, is hiring someone, and she's already selected who's going to work with her. But you should expect, for a site that's already built, I would expect $2,000 minimum for a simple site relaunch and redesign. It can be easily 3 to 5 times that amount if you're getting a customized WordPress template meaning that no one else is going to have that template. Or if you have a lot of pages or a lot of moving pieces, shopping carts, communities, a lot of functionality that has to be replicated. Sometimes, especially if you're moving from a page builder theme like Divi into something that's not a page builder theme, or any other theme, frankly, sometimes it's easier to actually start from scratch and just import. If you're a blogger, import your blog posts and then rebuild the pages starting from zero, rather than try to convert them into the new theme. So anyway, if you're going to pay someone to remove that burden from your shoulders, you can spend several $1,000s easy, and the cost can go up into the 5 figures if you have a lot of pages on your site that you're expecting someone else to convert for you. Lisa, is there anything you want to mention in terms of your process of talking this over with designers and marketers, and what considerations you had in mind?
Yeah, so I talked to several different people to figure out who is going to be the best fit. And I know for me personally, one of the things that's been really helpful is I wanted to have a managed hosting site. So I wanted someone else to be there to help me out. And I really talked through what my vision was, what I wanted to get out of this experience, and listened for how much of the tech they understood and how much their vision of what they could do aligned with what my vision was for the site. So I think it's really important to, meet with several people, ask them lots of questions, find out, what is going to work for you. I personally wanted to get away from Divi, and I'm not trash talking Divi at all. I'm not. I know that it's actually a very good theme, that lots of people like it. It just hasn't worked for me. And I think that moving on is better at this point, since I have to do a relaunch. So I would definitely say, do your homework, and, really think about, how do you want to run your business and where do you want to spend your time? Because yes, this is going to cost money. And of course, that's something to consider. And there's a lot of emotional labor that can go into trying to do these things if you don't have the tech skills and the frustration and the angst. And if you're a writer and you're working another job or doing other things, you already know that your writing time is limited. So you may have to make a decision. Are you going to hire some of this stuff out and protect your writing time, or are you going to take some of your limited time and do these other things? And only you can answer that question.
Indeed. Yes. I've seen some questions come in about Squarespace. I just want to say that I think Squarespace is a fine solution. I think it takes a lot of options off the table in a good way. Like, it sometimes with WordPress sites in particular, you have too many choices. But when you get put into like a smaller system with a limited number of themes, or it just makes things more streamlined. Most people aren't hiring designers for Squarespace because of the way Squarespace works. Although there are designers who work with Squarespace sites. I'm not saying they're not out there, but usually people use Squarespace because they're not hiring. So, it can really, it can save you on costs. I think if I'm not mistaken, their baseline plan is $25 a month, and it also integrates e-commerce functionality, meaning you don't have to worry about how to facilitate payments through your site on a WordPress site if you're using Squarespace, because on Squarespace, it's all baked in. Okay. So we're starting to get into the nitty-gritty here of Lisa's site and specific improvements I suggest she make. And for this part of the conversation, I asked her to provide me in advance a little pie chart of her business model. So where her income sources are, and also where she would like to be, because websites are long-term things, right? You don't want to build something for just this year, but something that's going to serve you for many years to come. So Lisa, do you want to describe what's going on here?
Yeah, so on the left is my current model. So a good portion of the money that I generate through my site and through my business is editing and coaching. So that's a majority of it. And then I also do a lot of teaching. And these are all things that I really like. However, one of the things that I have known for a long time is that if you want to have a sustainable business and you want it to grow, you need to be able to scale it. And that means that, I do a lot of one-on-one work. And some of the work that I do is very laborious and I enjoy it. But the more I'm doing this laborious work, the fewer people that I can actually help. And, in terms of my particular mission, I want to help the greatest number of people and provide access to those who may not be able to afford things like, full manuscript evaluations and things like that. So that's part of my mission. And so in order to be able to do that, I want to be able to do more group coaching. I want to be able to do webinars and kinds of teaching that are going to allow me to get in front of more people and have that, higher touch contact. I also really love writing, and I want to be able to have some portion of my business be about writing, right? So that's another thing that's important to me. And it's not really part of it. A lot of the writing that I do right now that is published generates business. So it does help me in certain ways, but it doesn't necessarily pay enough to kind of be part of the pie chart. I also do love editing. And so I don't want to get rid of all of it, because I do feel like when I'm editing, that helps me be a better writer and it helps me build my chops with everything else that I do. And I also know that I need to have some passive income, right? Because if you really want to grow, there are a limited number of hours in the day, and you can't be constantly just pushing forward, because that's how you end up burning out. So whether that's classes that people do on their own, advertising, or other things like that, I want to be able to have ways that I can build modules and things that will pay for themselves and continue to build income over time.
Excellent. So with that in mind, I'm going to stop the slide screen share, and I'm going to go over to Lisa's site. I'm going to talk about some of the things that I see happening there. Okay. Give me just a second. I'll share my screen. Can you see that, Lisa?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. Okay, so Lisa, you already know part of the work that has to be done here because you're getting new headshots taken, but definitely on the homepage, you know that the image needs to be replaced with something that's you. Mm-hmm. I remember when I first came to your website, this has been a long time ago, and I thought, but that's not her. Why? Who is this person? And so I do wonder how many people see that image, because I know you teach, right? I know you're in classroom settings, like at Writer House here in Charlottesville. So I thought, who did she take a picture of someone else teaching? But obviously yes. It hit me. Oh, it's a stock photo.
And I can tell you the story of that is that this was intended to be a placeholder while I got those headshots. This was kind of redesigned in early 2020. And then of course the pandemic hit, and yes, it's been there. And people will look at me like, that is not you.
So this is it. Okay, so I have to add the caveat for like everything I'm going to say about site design. Obviously, this is subjective. Different things appeal to different people. I'm going to say some things that you might not agree with or don't apply to your situation. Lisa might not take, even half of my suggestions, but I'm going to put it out there anyway as things I've noticed and experienced. If you are going to have, like I said, a really image-heavy homepage, it's got to be an image that counts. I think it's better to have no image at all. I would say for 50 to 75% of writers, because it just doesn't end up looking good. There's so many variables that go into, is that image going to appeal or work with your intended audience? So I don't think any active harm is being done here, but definitely if there's going to be an image on the homepage, we want it to be you, Lisa, and nobody else. The other thing you'll want to think about is the layering of the text on the image, if that continues in the new iteration. So like with those examples I presented earlier, I think you're probably going to want to have less text. And if you're going to have a button, it's probably just going to be one button rather than two. Although I certainly appreciate you marketing your class that we're hosting next week. But you have to resist that temptation, you have to resist the temptation to put it all in, and just say, I'm going to focus on just the one thing that's important to me. And then if you need to, you switch it out every week or whatever. Okay, so that's kind of like marching order number one for the homepage. I think if I remember correctly, Lisa, do you have a pop-up that appears?
I do have a pop-up that appears.
Okay, we may eventually see it. So
yeah,
in my mind, the pop-up, which is for your email newsletter, is duplicating what this section is doing for the email newsletter. So essentially, I would choose one or the other. Either you have the pop-up or you have the sign up really prominent on the homepage. And it's simply because this is really important real estate. So if you've already got the pop-up, I would much rather see what I do come up further on the page. The other thing, I really love these sorts of presentation styles on service-oriented sites. I have a service-oriented site, so I like that presentation you have here. But I think you probably also want to add some specific buttons underneath, because I don't know that people will actually understand that those are clickable. I understand, but I don't trust the average visitor to understand. I usually favor pretty tight homepages, meaning I trust that people, if they want to know more about you, or they want to look at blog posts, or if they want to if they want to contact you, they're going to end up at those places on their own. In fact, I would probably have a contact page in the navigation. I'll get back to the navigation in a minute. What I would probably, since you're actively blogging, what I would suggest prioritizing, aside from what I do, is what are your latest or what are your most popular pieces of content on the site. I'll just quickly show my husband's website. This is, I swear this is not self-interested, but he blogs once a year, right? So we don't want to show his latest blog posts because it will just show how inactive he is. So instead we have his most popular posts. And I think this is a really great choice for people who have some interesting content, but they're not, doing something every week. Okay. I'm neutral on the rest of this. It could go, it could stay. I think there are other places that these things typically live that people find. And I see we finally get to your blog here at the bottom, but I think it's too far down the page. At the bottom of the homepage, that is typically like information central. It's where we've often been trained to go to look for basic stuff like your contact page or the services you offer. Like it's a shortcut to lots of different places that might be important to people. And I'll use my own homepage as an example. So if we go down here to the bottom, we've got the learn more, products and services, free resources, and my social media links. Now, I'm not saying you should duplicate this exactly, but it's a really great place to add things like, here's a link to the contact page, rather than having to put the whole contact form on the homepage, which likely slows down the page loading time. And we will get to the page speed later and why that's important. Okay. This is down here in this footer area. This is also often called a widget area in WordPress. So every WordPress theme has like a sidebar widget area, usually a footer widget area. Sometimes there are even header widget areas. So those areas tend to be, they have outsized importance because they appear on every single page of your site. So for all writers thinking about this, think about what are the things that you really do, in fact, want to appear on every page of your site. Okay. Lisa, do you have questions about the homepage?
No, that was actually very clear and extremely helpful. I think the only question I do have is that if I were to choose between the pop-up for the newsletter or keeping something, like I have right now, would I set it up? Let's say that I chose to have what's already on the page. We'll just say that that's there, whether that's the right choice or not. Would I have pop-ups on the other pages, or should I just choose a pop-up for all the pages? Because the way it's set up now is like wherever you land, and I'm surprised the pop-up hasn't shown up because it actually should. I think it's set up to a rule, like if you're getting my newsletter, it doesn't show up or something like that. So that may be why. But what would you recommend in terms of the pop-up on each page or something like this?
If you want to make sure that people don't miss it as they get further into your site, or if they land on a blog post page, then yes, I would have the pop-up. If you're using a service like MailMunch, you have the ability to turn it off and on for the homepage, or to designate which pages it will be active on.
Okay.
What service are you using?
MailMunch.
Okay, so I think there's a checkbox that basically says don't show this on the homepage, and that's what you would do. For the next thing that I always take a look at, which is critical in the context of the homepage in particular, is the navigation. So here we actually have a two-layered navigation because we've got the social media bar and then we've got kind of the primary nav. I always generally recommend, because authors and writers tend to put too much in the navigation, I almost always inevitably recommend paring it down. Because we can only grasp so many items as a website viewer at a time. The rest we don't even see it. So for About Lisa Cooper Ellison, just to keep it simpler, I would say About. I think Classes is fairly important to you. It seems like that should stay, as should Services. Probably Blog stays, but I think Testimonials are best shown in context of the classes or the services. I don't know that it needs to be a navigational item. And Publications, I typically see put in the About page. But when you have many books out, it totally makes sense to have a navigational item for books, for sure. For Publications, I would expect that under About. And so that will help tighten up the navigation. The privacy policy is getting too much really precious time and space up there. I would put it at the bottom, but the social icons are fine, no problem. Any questions about that part?
Nope, that makes total sense to me.
Okay. The other thing that can be done in most navigational systems is you can nest menu items under. So for instance, if you do want Publications to pop up really clearly, you could nest it under About, or you could nest Testimonials under something if you wish. Let's see, on my page, I have the most popular blog posts nested. On Resources, I have the newsletters nested. So lots of options there. Okay, so I'm going to go to the About page. And this is a pretty fascinating case study for an About page, because my guess, and you'll have to tell me if I'm right, is that you've been following the advice of online marketers like, I don't know, is it Forleo? Am I getting her name right? Or other people who say you should write your About page in second person to the people who you hope will hire you. Am I right about this?
That is 100% correct.
Okay. Woo! All right. So I just know that because I see that recommendation in so many places. And I think for you and for a lot of writers as well, I think you're a writer first. I don't think you're a marketer first. I hope that is a relief to everyone who is listening. Should I repeat it? You're a writer first. You're not a marketer first. So in other words, this is not the self-publishing school website. This is not the B school website where, the only purpose of the site is to sell someone on a class or a product. You're a human being. And I think you should just have it focus. If I click on about Lisa on this site, I want to know about you. I don't want to hear about me. So I would write this to make yourself look like the best damn writer in the country. That's what I would do. Now, I'm not saying this copy is useless. It just should be moved over to your services page. That's it. So the bio that I would keep for this page is essentially starting down here under professional bio. And then if you want to say more, you could certainly say more. You could switch to first person like I do on my about page. This is a common convention with lots of different people where they will have the third person bio at the top of the page because, conferences and media outlets and reviewers, they'll copy and paste that professional bio for lots of different reasons. But your fans, the people who are stalking you in a friendly manner, they want to hear from you personally and your origin story and all the rest of it. So that can go below the professional bio, and you often switch to first person, but it's totally a personal choice and up to you. Do you have any questions or pushback?
I don't. I will say that I did work with someone on some of those things. I was given kind of pretty specific information that is contrary to what you're saying. However, what I had done first was exactly what you said to do, which is kind of talk more about my story. And they're like, no, you need to talk about, your client, like who you want to be your clients, talk about that. So it's interesting how people have so many different ways of looking at this. But what I will say is that what you're talking about aligns more with who I am. So it is a relief to hear you say that. And for all of you out there, trying to figure this out, do the thing that aligns with your own vision. You will be happier. I've always felt like a little bit like, oh, I know this is well written, but does it work?
Yeah, I think, one of the big questions I get about author websites is when you have different things that you do, where you're editing or coaching, or you have copywriting services, or you help people with social media, or you're an illustrator, like people start to wonder what, causes this paralysis. Like you don't know what to do with your website because you have multiple things that are maybe they're all important to you. So I think we're experiencing some of that with your site. I do think your homepage should be focused on probably like classes and services and like the information and education you provide. That makes total sense to me, because that your site is to support making money. So I do think the homepage has to retain that focus on getting the business that you want. But the about page, and I think writers and people who will employ you care about this. I think they want to know about you also as a writer and what work you do. And then you can sell us on the class or the service when we get to that part of the site. Okay, so heading over to classes and services, this has the exact kind of marketing language I would expect. It looks good. My only suggestion for this, as your business takes shape or as you have different types of classes on offer, you may want to have different sections of this page that define the sort of class it is. Like, is it a one-time live event? Is it a self-study? Is it a coaching group? Because you attract very different people with each type of offering. Going over to services. Okay, so this is where I think you probably have the most work to do, and this is common with freelancers of every variety. So I don't know how this page got started, like if there was one particular service you were offering. But what I'm seeing is that over time, maybe the number of services or options you offer has increased, and so you've added them. But unfortunately, this can create paralysis for the person who's looking at the page, and it's too many options to consider. And it's also hard to get a bird's eye view of what you're offering, and it takes us a while to get there. So there's private coaching sessions, there's manuscript evaluations, there's 2 different types of manuscript evaluations: the book proposal, developmental editing, and custom packages. There's nothing wrong with any of the content here, but I think it might be better if you had an introductory page that just mentioned the different buckets of help you provide. So there might be a coaching bucket, and then manuscript evaluation bucket, and then some other bucket. And you would just have brief descriptions, and then people can self-direct to where they want to explore further what you offer. So that, I think, would make this page more manageable for people. And you can always it's always easy for people to go back if they went down the wrong rabbit hole. Any questions about that?
No, that makes perfect sense. And it makes all of the things you're talking about made me really excited about a redesign.
Good.
Which is good, because up to this point I've been like, no.
So that takes us to the blog, and we're going to be talking more about the SEO considerations here. There's a huge change that you need to make to the blog, and that's we need to see an archive when we first land here. So what that means is something that looks like this. So in other words, we see the whole history of posts going back as far as we want to go very quickly. And then if we want to read a full post, obviously we can click in and do that. So right now, this is a WordPress setting. Usually in fact, I think you could probably change it now, although I don't know Divi well enough. Maybe there's some hangups here, but WordPress has a setting that dictates whether or not you're showing excerpts on this page, how the archive displays. I imagine Divi might have some options about how the blog archive displays. You want to go and look at those settings and change them so that we can see like all of your latest posts at a glance. Because these posts are lengthy, which is not a bad thing. But it takes us a while to get to the next post, and then a really long time to get to the post after that. So you'll want to make it easier on people to see, because we want to see the breadth of what you have to offer.
Yeah, I know that has been one thing that I've been frustrated about, and I'll take a look at that and see if I can fix it sooner rather than later, because I've not really liked how that works, because it's super hard for me. Like there'll be times when I'm like, oh, I want to go back to X post and relink it or do something with it, and it's really, really cumbersome even for me to find things and look through it. But again, I think that the customizations that were made that have felt rather fragile and precarious has made me afraid to push the wrong button.
Yeah. On the sidebar, this tends to be pretty important territory for a blog, because it helps people navigate things that might be further into your archive. So usually I suggest putting things like your categories closer to the top, although it doesn't look like you're actively using the categories or they're not showing up. It could either way. So you'll want to think about, this is more of a long-term thing, especially depending on how many blog posts you have, thinking about a category structure that would help people find stuff quickly based on their interest area, like memoir, platform building a scene, things that are important to you that you're marketing yourself for. And sometimes having a most popular posts section is very desirable. I do that at my blog. A lot of other people do too. And this is also a place to, list an upcoming class that you have or whatever, or if you had a book out, often you'll find that lurking in the sidebar of author sites. So like you can find it at my blog. There's my next online class about social media, my most popular posts, etc. But some people put social media widgets in here. I don't recommend that for you, but some people, like if there's something, whatever is important for you in terms of engagement, what you want people to notice, aside from the blog tools, those can go in the sidebar. let's see. Here under the author attribute, this is an easy thing to change in WordPress. You need to flip it so that WordPress shows your actual name rather than what I think is your username for the site. So we want it to say, Lisa Cooper Ellison with proper words and capitalization. The newsletter bit up here, again, if you have the pop-up, that negates the need for this. And right now, this isn't working that hard for you because it doesn't tell people what they're signing up for. So unless this were to become much more functional in that way, I would just take it off. If you have the pop-up, you don't need it. All right. Now we're going to talk more about content strategy, but in terms of just the logistics of your site, any questions?
No, I think you've been incredibly clear and helpful.
I'm going to stop there for the site critique because the other pages are, I think, more secondary and there's not much to discuss there. Is there anything else that you're wondering about or that you're struggling with in terms of what to do with these pages or how to build it?
No, I think one of the growth edges for this particular website is SEO. And I mean, I think that's a couple of different things which you're going to be talking about. So to me, I feel like that's the most important thing in it. And what I'm hearing from this is that, some of the issues with this is rearrangement of content, being more thoughtful with how the content is arranged, obviously getting my pictures on there. And then really thinking about what are the things that I want to do and how can I lead people to them in a more intuitive way, right? So one of the things that I'm hearing you say, and I have felt this myself, and that's why I'm going through this process, is that it's not a super intuitive website. Like sometimes people will run across my content and they're like, oh, I love this, I love that, but it's not super intuitive. And I do think that limits my reach. People who come to me have been referred to someone else, and then they're invested in learning about me because of that. But a cold user who knows nothing about me, I think that's probably who I need to be reaching more of, is those types of people.
As you were talking, I realized I didn't mention the things that are working about your site. And sometimes I forget to point out the strengths, for which I apologize. So some of the things that are working here, and it's like, overall, it's not a bad site. I think the back end was more horrifying to me when I saw it than the front end. But something we have is like really clear identity. And this is not a small thing, right? Like some people can't even get this right, or it's somehow messed up. But we have your name, it's really clear. What you do is really clear. And it follows us as we go through the site, which we want. It's also a pretty clean design. I mean, I do think some pages are overwhelming with the amount of content on them when we get over to like services, but it still looks fine. Also, it's well color coordinated. Some people make some pretty big mistakes. Like they'll have an all pink site, like a pink background, a pink, like with black text on pink. And it's, you don't even know where to start with that. But this, like, I could see you keeping the same color scheme. If you like it, it could carry over to any theme that you choose. I think the fonts are fine. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, it's very consistent throughout the font choices. So now you may not keep this font, you may decide to change it up, but the consistency is what's important. That's what lends cohesiveness. It's part of your brand. It's something that you can then replicate in other places like your newsletter or your business cards. That's the ideal, that you can carry this look and feel throughout all of your different touch points. Okay, so let's see if there's any last things I wanted to say. I don't think so. Okay, I think I'm ready to stop that and go back to the slide presentation. All right, so now we get into SEO. And this is a crossover issue because it's both a tech issue related to your site's hosting and how it's built, and it's also a content issue. So search engine optimization at its core isn't really, even though it can be intimidating to some people, at its core, it's pretty simple. There are technical bits, there are on the page factors, and then there are off the page factors. So I'm going to go through each category. The technical bits are, and I should probably just pause and explain what SEO is for anyone who's not familiar with the term. SEO stands for search engine optimization. It affects how your site ranks in search for specific search terms, which we'll cover what that means, what that looks like. So the better you rank in search, the more visitors you're going to get. And usually the more business you're going to get. So lots of people are competing to rank well in Google for certain search terms. All right. So how well you rank in search is affected by these technical factors like how fast does your site load? Google really loves blazing fast sites. They're very picky. They also look for a sitemap on your site, which indexes all the content. I'll show you what that looks like later. A mobile-friendly site is going to rank better every time. And Google, in fact, bases a lot of your ranking on the mobile version of your site, not the desktop version. And then, is your site user-friendly? So for example, if your site's loaded down with ads that take a long time to load, that affects the user experience, and Google dings you for that. And I'm using Google here as shorthand for all search engines. Other things that affect user friendliness, contrast between colors, how closely things are spaced together. There's like a list a mile long about this, and Google will tell you all about them when you ask it to analyze your site, and it's going to pick it apart and tell you what all the problems are. And I'll show you that tool in a second. And here it is. So Google has this tool called Page Speed Insights. It's free. Just go look for it, go Page Speed Insights, and you can put in any website address you want. And it's going to give you a score for the mobile version of your site and the desktop version of your site. As you can see here, Lisa's site on mobile does not get that great of a score. If I were to switch it over to desktop, it would look much better, but it would still be in the yellow zone. It would, I think it's around 75 or something like that. It is really hard to get a good score from Google. I don't want anyone to become too obsessed with this, because getting a score of 100 is, I think, requires a dedicated IT team. An average author probably isn't going to reach the 100 mark. However, having a good host, having caching like Cloudflare, which we talked about earlier, that will help. Having a theme that's lightweight and fast, that helps. So there are all of these different factors that affect the load time, and Google tells you all of that data and where it's dinging you on this page. Although if you're not technically inclined, it might not make a lot of sense to you. So I'm sure, Lisa, you're working with someone now who's helping you with this redesign, and I'm sure he's going to be running your site through this insights panel to make sure that your scores are better when you're through the process. So don't be alarmed by that score. The other thing is sitemap. Every website potentially has a sitemap, which is like an index to your site. So like just as books have indexes, sites have indexes. If you use certain tools, you don't have to do this by hand. There are tools that will auto-generate this for you, but you have to let Google know that you actually have a sitemap, and you have to tell it, here it is. Please use this index, please. Just recently, by coincidence, I was helping Mark, my husband, with his site. And I realized his sitemap had never been submitted to Google, because we were trying to figure out, why isn't his interview with this musician coming up in Google search? Like, we searched for it. I could not get it to come up, no matter how specifically I looked for it. And that told me something was broken. Like, Google didn't recognize the content existed in the first place. And it was because we had not submitted his sitemap. So we took care of that. And the very next day, like literally, his site traffic went up on November 6th. Look at that. Like all of a sudden, you see an increase. So there's some really easy fixes for some types of SEO problems. And this is one of them. Okay, if you're wanting to know where to submit your sitemap, there's something called Google Search Console. Don't worry, I'm going to have a resource list for you that mentions this. You don't have to write it down or anything. But you want to hook up Google Search Console and you go to the sitemap navigation button and you tell it where your sitemap lives. Now, if you don't have a sitemap, you can generate one using a plugin that I'll tell you about later. Some themes I may do that automatically. I use a plugin called Yoast SEO. All right, so we've been talking about SEO. As a reminder, we've just talked about the technical bits. Now I want to talk about the off the page factors, meaning stuff you have really no control over. And that includes the people who link to you, generally what your site has come to be known for, and also your site age. So this is maybe the one area in life where age is to your benefit. So like my site's been around now for more than 10 years, and that is hugely helpful for my SEO. And I don't, I just have all of this history associated with it. I have more links, I have more reputation. So this is something that you only accumulate over a long period of time, although you can help it along by doing things like guest posting for other sites that have reputation and ranking. So for example, Lisa has written guest posts for my site, and that helps her with her SEO. If she wants to start increasing it further, she's going to have to guest for some other sites in addition to mine if she wants these factors to play a stronger role. Finally, and this is the most important for the purposes of our discussion today, on the page SEO, this is what you do control. And the easy part is actually getting the metadata right. So the metadata is stuff like, what do you call things? Like, do you call your website Lisa Cooper Ellison, or do you call it something clever that is like LEC, which has no meaning to Google? So like actually writing headlines that have keywords in them, having categories for your blog posts, using subheads and having excerpts written for each blog post and page. All of this is stuff you can control and can help influence your SEO. The easy part is doing your homework or doing the housekeeping there and getting your metadata right, which is just the titles, subheadings, excerpts. The hard part is everything else, which is actually just knowing what to write about in the first place and having a content strategy that makes sense for you. So let me explain all of this with some screenshots. And I should pause here. Do you have any questions, Lisa, before I barrel on ahead?
No, I think that metadata is probably my growth edge. And so my mind is going metadata, 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 metadata.
Okay. Okay. So SEO goal number one in this situation is, can we just find you quickly if we search for your name? And you pass that test with flying colors. So if I go to Google and search for Lisa Cooper Ellison, assuming I already know who you are and I'm looking for your website, you come up first. In fact, you're the top 3 results because your Twitter and Facebook round out the top of the page. If I look for Lisa Ellison, you're there again, top 3 authors. And I think maybe this is partly because you publish under the name Lisa Ellison. And so, that's helping you as well. And now keep that in mind. Tip: when you're writing and publishing on other sites, usually you're not mixing up what you call yourself. You want to call yourself something consistent. Otherwise, you're diluting the SEO for your name and what you want to be known for or how you want to be found. In this case, it's not causing a problem. If it were causing a problem, like if I searched for Lisa Ellison and we got a lot of stuff that maybe we shouldn't, I might say you might want to change things, but all of this looks good. I don't see any issues.
Yeah, I think that some of that confusion came about because my website name had to be Lisa Cooper Ellison because Lisa Ellison was already taken.
Okay.
And so if you meet me on the street, I'm not going to call myself necessarily Lisa Cooper Ellison, but I try now to do everything consistently, professionally as Lisa Cooper Ellison for that very reason, to make sure that consistency is there. But yeah, that was something that I evolved into. It wasn't like an initial choice.
Yeah. Okay. So when you're thinking about how your site comes up in search results and how your subpages come up in search results too, just keep in mind that these page titles that you choose and that you have the power to change, they have search implications. So these are all keywords in Google's eyes, including the little descriptions underneath the pages. So the metadata that I'm talking about here, notice the little description of each page underneath the results. That's what I'm talking about when I talk about metadata. It's just a fancy word for this information, which you have control over if your site is self-hosted, especially. So, for myself, I've crafted a little excerpt here that fits within the character limit. So that's one thing that you could tweak. It's not a big deal, but you might want to think about tweaking that to fit within the character limit for that top level page. I mentioned earlier, for this metadata issue, Yoast SEO helps a lot. So it allows you to modify the title. It allows you to write that little description. It allows you to attach an associated image if there isn't one already. And then you can get a preview of how it looks on mobile as well as desktop. And you can customize it too for social media. So you can build a different preview for Google, Twitter, Facebook, if you want to get really, really hands-on with this, although I don't think it's necessary, but it's possible. So Lisa, that's something, if you haven't done it yet, that's some really good housekeeping for all of the navigational pages, the top level pages in your nav. Okay. That's something I would consider writing those handcrafted descriptions for. I also would do it for blog posts moving forward if you haven't been doing it yet. I don't know that it's necessary for, to go back, and I think that the time that would take it's not worth it. Unless it's a very popular post, which we'll talk about in a second. So, here's one of the bad things that happens when you don't have the metadata associated with the pages, especially on social, is that you don't get that really wonderful preview of an image that you've attached in the metadata. So when I did a check of lisacooperellison.com, there wasn't like a share image defined. So there's no image. And that may not seem like a big deal until you see what happens when you have a great image. So it just comes alive so much better when you've got that image that portrays what you want it to portray. And in your case, I think it's going to be your headshot. All right, so that was SEO goal number one, is just turning up in search for your name and then customizing that appropriately. The second one, this is the tough one, are the people who don't know you finding you for relevant searches. Now, what is a relevant search? That is up to you and what you want to rank for. And people often don't know what they want to rank for. This is in the business, this is called search intent. So what are people looking for? And then how can you intercept them with your content and bring them into your universe? So Lisa, I didn't warn you I was going to ask this question because I didn't want you to be thinking about it. Is there something you really, really want to be found for? That's not your name, something else.
Are you talking about like the things that I do?
I'm thinking about if someone goes to Google and they search for X, you want your website to come up first.
I mean, the first things that are coming to my mind are coaching. That seems to be something that's I guess top of mind. But I don't know if you're wanting me to say something different, or if there's a better answer to that question.
There is no better answer. Mainly, if you don't know, it's because you haven't thought about it. Or if you don't have a quick and ready answer, it's because you haven't considered it. But as soon as you start asking, I want more search traffic, or I want to improve my SEO, you have to back up and say, what for? Who am I trying to attract? What sort of search intent do people have where I want them to end up at my site for this specific thing? They're searching for, you mentioned one, they're searching for a coach. They're searching for a writing coach. We need to get specific. Maybe they're searching for memoir writing coach. That would be even better. So we want to make sure that when we're thinking about the search intent here, we're getting as specific as possible, because that will make it easier to rank and get the best fit. Like you want, it's hard to rank for something general like coaching. It's easier to rank for something like memoir writing coach.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing you say is come up with 2 or 3 categories for things that I really want people to come to my site for, and then make them as specific as I possibly can. Exactly. So coaching is too generic, but I've offered some better suggestions.
Right. These questions that I'm posing here, they're deceptively simple, hugely difficult to answer, because it goes to knowing your goals and where you want to be in the years to come. I stumbled into good SEO for my site. I didn't have a plan in mind. I was just interested in sharing information. And then when I realized what happened when you had really good SEO for a particular topic, I was like, oh my God. Like I now have all the business I want, although did I really want to attract these types of clients? That's because, so then you end up with a different problem. I'm attracting business I didn't actually intend by having good SEO. So you have to be really intentional with this if you want the best results. Okay. So just so people watching know, if you want, where Lisa's traffic comes from now, this is pulled from Google Analytics, which she signed up for. I would say it's basically half and half search results from Google, and then direct. Direct is people who have Lisa bookmarked. Sometimes it includes things like private message boards, like course websites at universities. It includes lots of things that Google can't see, basically. They can't really tell you where it came from, just that someone clicked on a link and they don't know where that link resided. It could have been a text message. It could have been a bookmark. Who knows? But it usually means it's someone who knows you already is visiting your site. Organic search tends to be people who don't know you yet. And then we've got some social, that's like Facebook, Twitter. We've got referral, that would be sites like mine, referring traffic. And then we've got email, that would be from your email newsletter. So Lisa, I don't think you have Google Search Console set up. I mentioned it earlier as the place where you submit your sitemap. But what's so valuable about Google Search Console is it will tell you what keywords are bringing people to your site. Google Analytics doesn't really do this, but Google Search Console does. Both services are free and they integrate with one another. So if I look at my stats here, unsurprisingly, I have a lot of people visiting my site because they searched for my name, and I would expect the same to be true for you. Query letter is next. How to get a book published, book proposal, query letter examples, book proposal, synopsis for a novel. So you can see, what sort of search traffic I'm getting. What the search intent of these people is quite specific. They want to learn how to write a query and get their book published. If I want people to find me because I'm going to help them relaunch their author website, I am failing on an SEO level. Now, I haven't been trying to attract people for that. I do have blog posts on that. But if I want to attract that sort of business, I would need to think about how can I get more of that traffic coming in, whereas today it seems to be pretty low in comparison to my most popular topics. Now, Lisa, I looked in Google Analytics at what content seemed to be responsible for your most organic search traffic. So people just flitting around Google looking for something to help them. These were the 2 posts. Your post on dialect versus diction. And this is from 2019. And then another one on creating a bird's eye view of your book. So these are 2 posts where I'd definitely go back to the metadata. I'd write the excerpt. I'd make sure that, you've done all of the housekeeping that we talked about earlier. You might even want to think about updating it if you have any updates. But other than that, just, treat these well, update them if necessary, and hopefully they'll continue to draw traffic as your site gets better. Do you have any thoughts about these posts? Are you surprised by this result?
I'm not surprised by the creating a bird's eye view of your book. That makes sense to me because I did a breakout session at Hippocamp on something similar. So the dialect versus diction is really a surprise. I would not have thought that would be the one that would come up. Yeah, so I guess I'm going to have to reread it and see why.
Whenever these surprises happen, I always suggest going to Google and searching for the topic. And usually you're going to see your post come up really early in search, and then you'll want to look at what else is around it. It may be that this post is serving a need that the competition isn't. And that's what we're going to talk about next, in fact. So I did some targeted searches to see how you're doing for really specific keywords like memoir coach Charlottesville, and you were top. You're beating someone else I know who is local or used to be local in the same area. So if you wanted to attract Charlottesvillians, job done. I didn't do the other search because it's crowded with I did it, but it's crowded with other competitors and you weren't near the top. Okay, so you're also offering a class on mastering the scene. So, there's some small number of people out there probably searching for that. And you came up third in results but this wasn't actually your site. It was the Teachable site, which makes sense to me because Teachable has really good SEO. So you're benefiting from their SEO power on that one, which is an interesting thing. Like if we have time, we can discuss that during the Q&A, how to use those things to your benefit. Memoir structure, you have a class coming up on that next week. So, just for kicks, I did a search to see who's ranking for memoir structure right now. We've got masterclass in there. They annoy me to no end because they have really good SEO and they're crowding out everyone else. We've got Writer's Digest. We've got Marion Roach, who is a really well-known memoir coach. And then also further down the page, there's a post at my site that Allison Williams wrote. So, you've written some memoir structure posts for me, and I would expect after some time has passed, those might start ranking well. The thing with SEO is that it takes time to kick in. So you're usually not going to see those nice results right away. It's going to be several weeks, if not several months in where you get the benefit. All right. So let's say, just, for fun, you wanted to become the memoir structure person of all time. Like you are going to build a recurring course on this. You want to speak at all the conferences. You're going to write a book on memoir structure. Before you would go down that path, you would want to take a look at who else is ranking for this topic, because what your goal would be, I want to make sure that when people do a Google search for this, my site comes up first, or at least in the first 2 or 3. So who am I going to have to beat down to get there? There's a really good tool called SERPstat. Think about it in terms of SERP, search engine rank position stat.com. That's what it stands for. So you can do some amount of free searching on here, enough to give you an idea, but for the full enchilada, you do have to pay money. But the free is good to start, because you'll see right here, if I look for memoir structure, we've got The Right Life, which is a really well-established writing site. We've got Writer's Digest. We've got Marion Roach. We've got something called Genius Memoir Writing, Jerry Jenkins. That's another well-established site. And you'll see my site's number 8. I'm not trying to rank for this myself, so I'm kind of surprised to see me up there, but that's great. All right. So notice that some of these sites are really competitive. You can tell that because of the number of keywords. Look at the number of keywords for Writer's Digest. It's like 250,000. For Reedsy, it's 500,000, which is shows you how strong they are with their SEO game. And then the visibility also gives you some indication. The higher the number, the more you're competing against someone who is difficult to knock down, at least for this particular keyword. So it just gives you a sense of how difficult a challenge you're setting yourself if you want to rank well for this particular keyword. And I think that it's a totally worthy endeavor. Even if you see someone like Writer's Digest up at the top of the results, you can knock them down because they're probably not paying much attention to their memoir structure ranking. So it doesn't take that much effort to get to the top of the list. As you can see with me at number 8, I'm not trying. I just have a lot of content at my site that's benefiting me there. So I'm going to pause there because I know I just dumped a lot of information on you. Is this helping? Is it clear about what you would be doing in order to improve your SEO?
It is clear. I think that it's going to be a lot to digest. And I think what I'm going to have to do is take all of this information in and then create a hierarchy of things that need to be done and kind of go through them one at a time. So at this point, I'm just taking a whole lot of notes, but you're bringing up some great points that I want to think about. What do I want to be known for, not just now, but in 5 years? And so, yeah, I have this list of like, this is the way I want to run my business. Well, what's going to specifically be in there? And then how do I design my site in the SEO in order to get me there? So it's kind of like thinking well in advance of where I want to go and making sure the breadcrumbs are there. Whereas right now, I mean, some of those things are there, but it's not doing the work that it needs to do.
So I think for those listening who might feel either confused or overwhelmed, either way, the main takeaway is that SEO, from a technical perspective, it's very easy to check those boxes. If you have a decent host, if your site is built even halfway decently, if it loads reasonably well, that part's simple. The harder part is the strategic part. It gets into content strategy and what you want to spend your time building a business for. Mm-hmm. You're not going to get Google traffic for something like this. You can get it for your name straightforwardly, but for something like this, where you want to compete for business, you have to start looking at who else is ranking and then set out, a strategy of how many different blog posts you're going to do, how you're going to tackle the topic in a new way, and how you're going to get people to share that and link to it so that it acquires good reputation over time. So publishing the content is just step one. Then you've got those off the page SEO factors of who's linking to it and sharing it that will affect its future success as well. All right, so to summarize that, if you want organic search traffic, this is all about the marketing funnel for those who are into marketing terminology. Ask first, what am I funneling people to that's going to make this worthwhile? So if you do a bang up job on memoir structure, like if you rank first for memoir structure, but you're not selling a book on it, you're not selling a class on it, you have no future interest in this topic, well, you've made a lot of wonderful information available, but you haven't pushed your business forward with it. So you really need to think about linking those things. Then once you figure out what you're funneling people to, you do that research, that competition research I showed you. Then you start to build and publish the content, know who's going to share it to increase its reputation. And then you start tracking the results to see how well you're doing and where you're still having trouble. And you do that using Google Analytics and Search Console. All right, so I know I didn't plan to go this long, but thank you for those who are bearing with us. So this is the tail end here is the newsletter issue, which I know many writers are concerned about. Trying to get email newsletter signups and trying to get more signups through the website. There's also an issue here where I know Lisa is duplicating some newsletter content on the blog or vice versa. Like there's some overlap, which is not a bad thing, but it probably feels like, couldn't there be less effort involved in getting this work done? So I want to summarize at a high level how to think about content as far as its final destination, or well, I should say its initial destination, where you're going to publish it first. The blog is great for content where you want it to rank. You have an SEO strategy in place. It's got to go on the blog. If it's an SEO strategy, the newsletter will get you nowhere with SEO. So the other thing that's helpful with blog content is that when you link to people, they're usually alerted. They know it. And that's not true with a newsletter all the time. It's more iffy. If you want to encourage sharing on social media, put it on your blog. And also guest posting elsewhere increases your reach and increases your own site SEO. The newsletter is great for reaching people who are invested in what you do already. So that's the great place to announce new products, services, books, news and events. Stuff that you're not trying to rank for search, put it in your newsletter for the people who are most likely to care about it, assuming it relates to them. To be more personal and intimate with people, that's great for your newsletter because Google does not understand intimacy. It also doesn't understand humor or cleverness or lots of things that make life good. So when you have that type of content you don't have that SEO strategy, newsletter is great for it. And then finally, your newsletter is ideal for letting people know about new blog posts. So, certainly you can have a section of the newsletter that says, here's what appeared lately, and send people off to read it there rather than including it in the newsletter. So I haven't addressed the question that I know Lisa has. Well, what about actually building the list? The honest truth is that most websites don't enjoy enough organic search traffic to build a list quickly. I mean, if you get more traffic through SEO, yes, it will happen. But currently, I know Lisa's site numbers, and it's probably not going to do what she wants in terms of newsletter growth. So there'll have to be other means probably used here. One popular strategy you can see used by James Clear. He uses Instagram almost entirely to share content that's in his newsletter, and he does a really great job of it. So check out his Instagram account, look at his stories, look at his posts, and you'll pick up some really great tips on building a newsletter. And notice it's also in his bio. And then Twitter is really useful as well for getting people onto your list if you share information and other things that when people consume it or they see it, they're like, wow, I don't want to miss the next one of these. And then they sign up for your newsletter once they get to the end of the thread. This example I'm showing you on the screen isn't perfect because I don't have that final call to action that says sign up for my newsletter for more. But if you follow this account, Julian, who's pretty interesting to follow if you're a creator of any kind, you're going to notice he uses this strategy all the time. So you can see he's really trying to build his list by repurposing content he's published elsewhere and turning it into a Twitter thread. So this does take some work, but it's super effective. So I know that Lisa is active on Twitter and Instagram. That's why I chose these examples, but the same tactic can be used on just about any social media site. Okay. Deep breath. I have finally gotten through everything I wanted to get through. I'm going to get a drink of water. I'm also going to put some links in the chat. And I'm going to let Lisa decide what questions she wants to ask.
So first, I just want to say thank you, Jane, for your thoroughness, for going through all of these things and demystifying the process and giving us this fire hose of information that we can all use to improve our sites. Because I think it can be challenging to try to figure out how do you tell a cohesive story about who you are when you do a lot of different things and kind of make it work for you. Right this moment, I don't have any additional questions. I have advice for others, which is the advice that I'm going to give to myself, which is I took a lot of notes. I plan to watch this again and maybe even watch it in segments so that I can digest it and say, okay, now I'm going to do this one piece and then I'm going to do this other piece. And that way I can kind of batch these ideas and batch this information mentally for myself, because there are so many different ways that we could work on it. So that's kind of where I am with the information, is just deep gratitude and a lot of information swirling my brain. So I'm wondering what other questions people have that you might be able to answer.
I'm going to take care of some of the links that people say aren't working for them. So give me just a second. I'll be done with that here. I want to, so the resources I'm sharing, one of them is, I'll just do a screen share here for a second. Hold on. Probably the most important thing I'm putting in the chat right now is the link to the resource list. So make sure that you grab that, because a lot of the tools that I discussed are right here, as well as some of my basic advice on building out an author website, self-hosting, etc. If people want to download the slides, there's that link. I've added a link to the Business Clinic homepage where I'm going to be posting the recording. And then if you want to be considered for a future Business Clinic, I do have an application that you can fill out. So hopefully those links are now working in the chat. And I'm now going to go take a look at the Q&A. I know there are many. Let's see. So EM asks how to prioritize the relaunch and the related to-dos. I think one of the first decisions you're going to make is whether or not you're hiring someone. Do you have the budget? Do you have $2,000 to $5,000 sitting around to help build your site or migrate it or redesign it in some way? If you don't, then the next steps include thinking about what it is you need to change or modify about your site. Do you need to change hosting? If so, you need to do that first. Do you need to change your theme? If so, that's next. And then you can start working on some of the smaller issues that we discussed as part of the session today. The SEO stuff is, we could talk about that as part of almost any type of marketing class. For this class, it was included here because it's website specific, and Lisa's interested in marketing through SEO. SEO, is a really huge topic that we, I do hope to offer another class on it, like a dedicated class on it. But there are lots of factors that go into it aside from just your own site. It affects social media and your activity there, because your social media posts are indexed and can be found. It affects the sites where you teach, like we saw the Teachable platform come up when we looked for Lisa's name. So there are many factors there. So I hope that helps EM Clark think through the different steps that you have to take. When you're switching to that new theme, you'll want to start considering, okay, what you need to put some guardrails on the process by thinking about what's your color palette going to be, what are the fonts you're going to use, so that you don't get tempted to use lots of different conflicting images and fonts and aesthetics. You want to keep it pretty tight and make some of those decisions up front, and then stick to them. Lori asks, what does a fiction author who doesn't sell services or products other than her novels do best with a website? Mainly your website is going to showcase the books. And if you have affiliated goals like speaking, book club appearances, those are going to become quite prominent on the site. If you take a look at my guide to building an author website, which is in the resource guide, it will itemize for you the most important factors for an author website which assumes you're not selling services, you're just focusing on the books and your published work. Diana asks, what was the site name for searching for the page and post metadata? Oh, yes. What was that? Let me find it because I forgot to put it in the resource guide and I would like to add it. Hold on just a second and I will look it up. I can't tell what it was. I will add it to the resource guide, promise. I'm going to make a note right now. And that should be there within the hour. Thank you for the question, Diana. Nicole says, my website at Journo Portfolio scored 89 on page speed insights. That's pretty good. But the field data and origin summary both say the Chrome user experience report does not have sufficient real world speed data for this origin. What does that mean? I have no idea. I have not encountered that message before. But if you're scoring 89, I think you're doing really well. So congratulations. All right. Lindsay says, how important is it for authors to have a blog component to their website? Not important whatsoever unless you are going for this SEO play that we talked about. So if you want to rank for certain search terms outside of your own name or outside of your book titles, then you're going to have to give some thought to blogging or doing something that would attract people to your site. So, for example, some fiction writers will blog about the genre that they write in, and they'll do title roundups, they'll do trend reports, they'll review other writers' books in their category. So those are all common ways to use a blog for SEO purposes if you're writing fiction in particular, which we, since Lisa's nonfiction focused and focused on serving the writing community, we didn't talk about some of those options, but that's what's common. But again, it's not important. It's only if you're going to play that game. And it's a fun game, but it's not for everyone. Yolanda says, I threw my website into the page speed site and got 80% for desktop and 39% for mobile. I've been there. I feel you. It is terrifying to see that. And so she's wondering what are the reasons for such a difference? Google is super, super picky about the mobile loading time. Even my site, I don't think gets above 70 for mobile loading. It might be a little bit better than that, but it is hard. And I'm still trying to parse through the reasons it gives for not, because it'll try to tell you in a report what's not loading fast. But, it's usually referencing things that they're just integral to how WordPress works. So it's hard for me to say if it's a WordPress issue or it's a theme issue or it's something I've decided it's something I can't fix. But if you dig into the page speed insights, let me do a quick screen share. Let's see. So I can show you where those explanations are. Let me do Lisa's site because there might be something specific there for me to discuss. Someone's wondering if I've considered doing a course on understanding Google Analytics. If I understood it, I would do a course. I understand it well enough to find the data you saw today, but I don't understand it well enough to teach it. I could probably do a free session on it, but not a course that people would pay for. Okay, so here we've got the 53 score on the mobile. I'm getting that same look. I'm getting that same message that was mentioned earlier. I have not seen that message before. So that's odd. I wonder if that might be momentary. I would try this again later. Okay. So you'll see here opportunities. These suggestions can help your page load faster. And usually you find, like for instance, Lisa has a lot of images on her homepage that are JPEGs and PNGs. Google really wants you to have them stored in WebP format because they load faster. That's a really simple change. And I know that Lisa's web migration person will take care of that. So that's an example, like if you have really big images on your site, that really slows it down. So that's one of the first places that you always look. We see there's another image issue here. Again, this is just tied to loading images and efficiently encode images, reduce JavaScript. So this is some of this stuff you couldn't take out even if you wanted. This is where you get into the really picky territory. Properly size the images. Let's see if there's anything else here. Some of this stuff has to do with your theme and how it's built. Does it use scripts? So if you have a theme that is really heavy on running these scripts, that also you can get dinged by that and have a really low score on page speed insights. So I hope that gives you an idea, Yolanda, of what might be happening. Always scroll down to see these suggestions. Usually you can find the culprit there. All right. Dale asks the universal question I hear from unpublished writers, which is how important is a website if you're not yet published? I don't think it's critical, but it's certainly nice to be working on because you don't want to be building it at the moment that you need it. It's nice to get this learning curve out of the way and also start having your site rank for your name. So if this is an SEO reason, once you have a site established, Google will start indexing the site and it will start popping it up when people look for Dale Messmer. And if you have that already in place, long before you're published, you can be more confident about having a good ranking site when your book actually releases. Remember that I mentioned earlier, SEO takes time to kick in. It can take weeks, months for Google to recognize you've got some stuff and it matches up with these search terms. So you want to give Google enough time to recognize your site, and having it around longer just generally helps. Diana asks, what fonts do you use on your website? I use Georgia. Do you know what you use, Lisa?
Not right off the top of my head, no.
I love Georgia. I use it for everything. I use it on handouts. I use it on my business card. I use it in my newsletter. I use it on my website. Okay. Lynette asks, how do you feel about putting the sign up form in the footer? I think it's okay. It just depends on how far do people have to scroll to get to that footer. Some people don't reach the footer, so just keep that in mind. We've got someone asking if I recommend a plugin for image optimization. Possibly there are plugins that will squish the images for you. So it's not a bad idea, but you just have to be careful when you add plugins to your site, because first of all, they can break the site. Not common, but it happens. And second of all, they can slow down the site. So just make sure that the plugin you're adding is worth whatever cost might be associated with managing it. Most plugins are free, but you do have to make sure that they're updated and that they're working properly with everything else on the site. If you're working with someone, a technical website manager, they can advise you on the best plugins to use. That's one of the best reasons to have managed hosting or to have someone help you with these migrations, is that they already know kind of off the top of their head what are the best plugins to use, which tools do you need, which ones can be disposed of. And I think, Lisa, you mentioned the guy you're working with, Sean. He knew right away what contact form to switch to.
He did. And contact form 7, in case you're having any issues with email, it is not really helpful. I have had a whole ton of porn and other inappropriate things come through. And as soon as I started talking to him about it, he was like, oh yeah, contact form 7. There's your problem.
Yeah. Yeah. Someone's asking if a privacy statement is necessary if your host tracks your site visitors, but you personally don't track. Anytime you're selling something, adding someone to an email newsletter, if you have Google Analytics installed, usually you want a privacy policy. There's a really good service called iUbenda, and I'll add this to the resource guide, that automatically generates a privacy policy for you that you can link to. This is what I use for my site. It takes the guesswork out of it. So I would say recommended if you're selling or signing people up. But I don't think it's like, I wouldn't be freaking out if you don't have one, unless you're running payments through your site. Okay, I'm just scrolling. We're at the very, very end here. So I'm just looking to see if there's any other questions I feel like I absolutely must answer. EM asks, is it okay to just use your email address rather than a contact form? I encourage a contact form because more people actually use it than just using your email address. It also keeps your email address private. But, I've seen both ways used. Neither way is wrong. You can use both at once. Okay. Yolanda asks, when I mentioned way back that publications could go under about, did I mean the page should be integrated or that the link should show up in the navigation bar? Either. So initially I was suggesting Lisa should list her publications on her about page, so it should be integrated. But, some people have publications that go on forever and ever and ever. And in that case, you might want a separate page that's nested under about. So it's, whatever serves your needs best. Diana asks if I recommend having a newsletter sign up on every page in the widget footer if you have a pop-up, or is just having the pop-up enough? It doesn't help to duplicate some of this, but usually I think the pop-up is enough. I can tell you what I do. I have a pop-up, and then for people who miss the pop-up, I do have, as you saw, a navigation item, a nested item for my free newsletters. So if people are navigating around and they miss the pop-up or it hasn't, whatever, they can still find evidence that I have these newsletters. It's also mentioned in the sidebar. So I feel relatively confident that people are going to find it. A lot of this is just testing. So if you're using a tool like MailMunch, and I need to add that to the resource list too. If you're using a tool like MailMunch, you can build different types of forms and then test to see where you get more signups. So I don't know if you received this, Lisa, but there's a weekly report that I receive from MailMunch that tells me how many signups I got from each and every form. And that tells you really quickly where people are seeing the forms and where they're compelled to actually sign up. Okay, so I'm going to end it there. I know there are more questions. I wish I could get to them all. We've gone into the dinner hour here, so I'm going to conclude. The links are in the chat. You also will get those links in a follow-up email that's going to be sent tomorrow with the information about the recording. So if you want to go back and listen, yes, the recording will be available, and you can also get the resources as well. I hope this was helpful for those of you who are considering this sort of change in the future. I know it's a really big change. It's a scary change. It can cost a lot of money, but I find that there are few things as satisfying as just having a site that really reflects your priorities, as well as just your aesthetics and your overall purpose as a writer or freelancer or human being. So I think even though there's a lot of pain involved, I think it's worth the effort. Lisa, any final words?
I'm not sure I understand.
Siri did not understand.
So first, I just want to say thank you again for everything that you've shared. And yes, this makes this feel more manageable and more understandable. I feel less angst about the process. And so I hope that all of you feel the same way. Yes, it's a lot, but I can tell you, from having a website that does not work, the level of rage that is possible in your day is quite high. And having something that works, just even that little bit of the site migration has just made me feel so much better about what I do and more confident, and I think that when you have your web presence, it's really about your forward facing, part of your business, and you want to feel confident about that. So make sure it works properly.
All right, everyone. Thank you again for joining, and look for that follow-up tomorrow. Have a great evening.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Take care.